If these stats don't scare you, what might is thinking ahead to what a future looks like with no changes made today. In the worst case climate path scenario, by 2050, close to 160 million women and girls globally may be pushed into poverty as a direct result of climate change. Welcome to The Scaries, brought to you by Racerco. I'm Sky.
And I'm Talitha. We are proudly broadcasting from Treaty 4 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In each episode, we tackle the alarming, inconceivable, questionable, shocking, and scary statistics relating to, impacting, and intervening with the lives of women and girls worldwide.
You'll hear the scary truth, take away tools and tips, and learn about what you can do about it. And The Scaries is an opportunity to share our voices as women and supporters of women to make real change. As always, the opinions shared on this podcast are solely our own, and this is for entertainment purposes only. And we will be sharing some content that could be triggering to you, so listen with caution.
As straight, cisgender, white, able-bodied settler women, we are very aware of our privilege, and we want to use this platform to spread awareness about the scary reality that women from around the world face in different life situations.
And why?
Because sometimes nothing is scarier than being a woman. All right. I feel like Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah. What's that from? All right.
I think it's, that's, I think originally, I think it's from Dazed and Confused. But
it's from Wolf of Wall Street.
But he does it in Wolf of Wall Street. He's like, yeah, I love it. Sorry, we digressed a little bit. So coming off the heels of Earth Day, happy belated Earth Day. Let's talk about climate change and how it's hitting women harder than the men's. It's not just about polar bears and melting ice caps, although we love them so dearly. It's about how women, especially in, poorer or underdeveloped countries who arguably contribute the least to climate change, are getting the short end of the stick. They're dealing with floods, droughts, and they're the ones left picking up the pieces. And the UN warns that they'll suffer the longest and the hardest from these crises. Unchecked climate change will derail progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And while, the Sustainable Development Goals are extremely important, I feel like just like overall, humanity and everything else is what's really important too.
Yes.
And the magnitude of climate change's effects, including on female poverty and hunger, remain unknown, but it is expected to be substantial. The UN states it bluntly: gender inequality coupled with the climate crisis is one of the greatest challenges of our time. It poses threats to ways of life, livelihoods, health, safety, and security for women and girls all around the world. On top of that, experts predict that by 2050, over 216 million people could be displaced due to climate change.
216 million.
And that's like within our lifetime, very much so.
That's like 25 years from now. Yikes.
It's insane.
How can this be?
Great question.
What is going on? And why are women more impacted? It's, something I've heard a lot about, but I've never actually taken the time until now, which is sad for me to really dig into what's going on and why is this impacting women? So let us tell you. So a New York Times article states that although climate change is a collective problem, it burdens displacement, homelessness, poverty, sexual violence, and disease. All things which weigh more heavily on women and girls. 80% of people displaced by climate change are women.
80%?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And when people are forced from their homes, women and girls face higher risks of violence, and their access to reproductive health care drops significantly when they need it the most.
Yeah.
The Center for Climate Justice based at Glasgow Caledonian University explained to the BBC that climate change affects women more for two main reasons.
Okay.
Number one, extreme weather disasters intensify existing inequalities in society that women face. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And number two, women don't have enough representation at climate talks and policy decision making to have their say on effective solutions. So the same old song.
Yeah.
It just makes things work for women, like what we're already dealing with. Yeah. Plus, we just aren't involved in the decisions around it to
have any kind of say. We
should be 80% of the decision makers, at least.
Totally,
because we're 80% of the people impacted. But Here's the thing. Whether women are at the table or not, they are impacted, and they're not just sitting around waiting for the world to collapse. Women really are leading the charge in climate change and finding ways to adapt to it and make things better. Whether they're managing land sustainably or developing smart ways to save water, women are at the front lines.
Of course we are.
Of course, always.
Yeah.
But our efforts are, as always met with some roadblocks, from issues of owning land in the first place to getting a decent education or job. Women across many, many continents are often left out in the cold. And in industries like farming, where women tend to do a lot of the manual work, they're not getting the support they need to deal with climate change. Is there a bright side?
God, I hope
I
so.
wonder. Well, I think there is. When we break down these barriers and give women a seat at the table, or tell them to create their own table, which oftentimes is what we have to do, we can make climate policies that work for everyone. And this is, I know, easier said than done, but it's not just about saving the planet. It's about making sure no one gets left behind today and honestly for generations to come. We're thinking the 7th-generation thinking right now.
Totally. Yeah.
So we can survive and fight this. We just have to do it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Laurie Campbell had mentioned that 7th-generation thinking in the matriarchy episode. So if you don't know what that is, listen to that one and you can hear. But yeah, it's super important to think about not just ourselves, but like what's to come. But before we get into how we can break down the existing barriers, let's first go through some definitions, as some of this is pretty scientific stuff and was not necessarily common knowledge to us. So we're just going to make sure that you understand along with us. So first, what is climate change? Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Such shifts can be natural due to changes in the sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions. But since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. The main greenhouse gases that are causing climate change include carbon dioxide and methane. And I actually saw this thing that was like 4% of the methane gases are from like cows pooping and farting.
Yeah, that's wild. How?
There's just like so many cows. That's what anyways, not funny, but like funny to think about it.
Interesting.
I think I'm just like a child at heart and think farts are funny. Anyways, so these high numbers and the carbon dioxide and methane come from using gasoline for driving a car or coal for heating a building, for example. Clearing land and cutting down forests also can release carbon dioxide. Agriculture, oil, gas operations are also major sources of methane emissions, along with the cows. But get this, the 7 biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, which are China, United States, India, the European Union as a whole, Indonesia, and the Russian Federation, along with Brazil, accounted for about half of all the greenhouse gases globally.
Wow.
In 2020.
Whew, so that's 7 different, well, not 7 countries, but like 7 regions.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ooh, scary stuff, but also very enlightening.
Yeah.
So here's another term for you, and it's a little bit more hopeful, I would say.
Yeah.
And the term is degrowth. Degrowth is the idea that a finite planet cannot sustain ever-increasing consumption. So it requires those in the global north to reduce production and consumption to preserve resources and minimize further environmental harms. So really, it's about intentionally slowing or decreasing economic growth. Intentionally. So it's not like a recession where it just happens and everyone flips out. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
No, it's based on the idea that a world has limited resources, and only by reducing production and consumption can we ensure a sustainable future for humanity and our planet. This idea includes balancing things out, like reducing how much wealthy countries take from natural resources while allowing disadvantaged countries to catch up with the benefits of development enjoyed by wealthier nations, such as better living conditions, education, healthcare, and other advancements. So really, it's like, what can we do to consume less and
be more
grow
intentional?
gardens? Grow gardens, do your own thing. You don't have to buy. And just be thinking about that.
Yeah, be thoughtful in your consumption.
Mindful.
I feel like that's one of the things with this like global north idea, is that the consumerism and capitalism is like, go harder, get more, consume more. And so degrowth is like really the opposite of that. It's like, slow down.
Well, and like, it's tough because they want our economy to slow down. Like, they intentionally want us to say, like, let's stop trying to make so much money and let's just focus on our planet. And so we can actually like live to use that money in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
It's contradictory, I think, in a lot of ways. Well, like, not contradictory, but the ideas contradict each other. Anyways, so with those two main terms in mind, let's get into the scaries that so many women and girls across the world are facing on the daily. But a quick note before we do, it's important to note that climate change is not gender neutral and should not be reported that way. The impact of climate change amplifies gender inequalities and is an important part of the story. In fact, sex disaggregated data, which is data collected and then tabulated separately for women and men, is vital for fair reporting on climate issues. And we actually see this in the book, I think, that we cannot stop talking about, which is Invisible Women, and like looking at data. And it's not just in climate issues, but it's everywhere of how women get wiped from the story if they're not reported with that data.
Yeah.
So with all that being said, let's go through some of the central after effects of climate change that women are more impacted by worldwide. First is water scarcity. So according to UNICEF, women and girls are responsible for retrieving water in 80% of households that require water collection. And I mean, that's not even something we are familiar with here.
No,
like, we don't have to
course.
collect water. Yeah. However, as climate change leads to water scarcity, women must travel further to find water, increasing their workload and leaving less time for education and other income generating activities. I think a lot of girls also then just end up dropping out of school, like women and girls dropping out of school.
It takes so long just to get a basic need.
Yeah, exactly. The next is impact on female farmers. So a report from the United Nations found that women are less likely than men to see their work demands decrease during periods of extreme heat. Women farmers often work on small-scale farms and rely on natural resources for their livelihoods, making them highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Additionally, females that farm have limited access to resources and information, such as credit, land ownership, and even technology.
And that's like, limited education. How are you going to understand how to use all this technology or build the technology if you don't have that? So it's one and the same. Like they're stuck using very manual.
Yeah. And then
ways.
even like small farms, like you're not going to be making the money or even it be worthwhile to get a huge combine because it makes no sense. Yeah. The next is increased violence. So women are more likely to face gender-based violence and exploitation as they travel further to find resources in times of scarcity. Additionally, climate-induced disasters can exacerbate gender inequalities, making women more vulnerable to gender-based violence. Finally, research indicates that women and girls are up to 14 times more likely to be harmed during a disaster.
So, like, one thing after the next. They're already displaced, and then they have to be violated, and then just, like, going into, the next one is poverty.
Yeah.
Like, it's just snowball effect.
Oh, yeah. Can't get a win.
So on the note of poverty, it increases with climate change, as you can imagine. The Asian Development Bank states that due to the low rate of women's participation in the labor force in many countries, and that women are often mostly self-employed in the informal economy, they're more likely than men to live in the poorest households. This makes them more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, which can exacerbate gender inequalities and limit women's economic opportunities. The next one, impact on education. So natural disasters and extreme weather events can damage schools fully and disrupt educational activities. Like one day you got to school, the next day you don't.
Yeah.
What happens? And so this leads to missed classes, decreased access to education for largely women and girls. And these events already disrupt the education system of approximately 37.5 million students each year.
Ugh.
And more than 200 million adolescent girls living in poverty face greater risk from these extreme weather disasters. So
I can also imagine that probably like rebuilding the school is not the first thing on the agenda for when things get destroyed in that way.
And so the last one is a lack of access to contraception. So in 2021, an analysis from MSI Reproductive Choices across 26 climate affected countries found that since 2011, an estimated 11.5 million women had their access to contraception disrupted due to climate related displacement. Their modeling indicates that this will worsen over the next decade, with an estimated 14 million women at risk of losing access to contraception due to climate-related displacement. So if access is not protected for these women, this could lead to an additional 6.2 million unintended pregnancies, 2.1 million unsafe abortions, and 5,800 maternal deaths.
I know that they're like contraception and the talk about contraception can be such a divisive topic, but it's going to happen regardless. Like sex is going to happen. And, you know, we just heard about like being violated and like sexual assaults and all that kind of stuff. So I just don't understand why this is not just such a huge part of this whole piece, because you're going to have babies and then you're going to add to the population, which already cannot sustain this like climate change. And having a baby is no easy task, as we are aware of.
Of course, in a stable economy and situation, let alone
like safe.
When you don't have a house.
Yeah, exactly. Or like access to water and like all that kind of stuff. And then of course people are going to go the route of like trying to have an abortion. And then that's not safe when like, again, water isn't clean and you don't have access to like proper healthcare. And then maternal deaths, like more women die of having a baby than like a lot of other things. So
of course, it's heartbreaking and scary. So if
scary.
If these stats don't scare you, what might is thinking ahead to what a future looks like with no changes made today. So in a report from November 2023, UN Women looked at 2 possible climate futures. A current path that, if we continue on with today's amount of action, says where our average temperature rises about 2 degrees Celsius, but stabilizes by the year 2100. So that's like, okay, if we stay exactly where we are by doing the same amount of activity. But a worst case scenario, if policies change and you never know with a new government what's going to happen across the globe, the worst case scenario is where an average temperature rises worse than the current path suggests. This is a rise of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius by 2100. So not that big of a change. Like we're the current path is around 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase, and the worst case scenario is 3 to 4 degrees Celsius increase. So
that's not that big of a difference.
It's not that big of a difference. In the worst case climate path scenario, by 2050, close to 160 million women and girls globally may be pushed into poverty as a direct result of climate change. 2050. So again, not far away.
No.
And food insecurity caused by climate change is also projected to increase by close to 240 million more for women and girls, compared to 131 million for men and boys. Food insecurity.
Yeah. So like double, almost. Well, I think it's time for some good news.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
The good news is that women and girls are becoming increasingly empowered to contribute to, benefit from climate action.
Amen.
Yeah. We're not just sitting around and just twiddling our thumbs. Within the UN climate change process, many countries have shared how they are integrating gender across different priority sectors within their national climate action plans. The Gender Action Plan, agreed by governments under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, calls for women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in the international climate process, and to ensure a prominent role for women in decision making and in climate action. That representation. Governments meeting under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change adopted a goal of gender balance in national delegations and in climate change policy and action in 2012. Since then, the UN Climate Change Secretariat has reported annually on the gender composition of national delegations and policy and decision-making bodies under that framework and the Paris Agreement. What is needed now is for countries to be deliberate in how they seek to achieve gender parity in local, national, and international climate policy and decision-making roles to ensure women's voices and impacts are being heard and acted upon.
Yes, please.
It's like that Indigenous way of nothing about us without us.
Yeah. So what can we do? Well, from a policymaker standpoint, as Talitha mentioned, there's a lot of things to be done. But from an everyday folk standpoint, there's still things that we can do. So there's kind of high impact actions and then some micro actions that Talitha will go through. So I'll go through the high impact things. Honestly, number one, first and foremost, vote. We have an election coming up here in Canada in our province. Like, get out there.
Yeah.
Participate, hold the government accountable, pay attention to what's happening at all levels of government, and play a role in shaping these decisions. Your vote is a role, so use it. Build a community. Building healthy, caring relationships with each other and the land is key to combating the climate crisis. Consider ways in which you might participate in your own community to lend a helping hand, to consume less, to think of that degrowth concept. Recognize your collective power. As always, the power of change lies in the masses. The more people that band together to think about this and to focus on a goal, the more results we'll see. So
absolutely
examine all the historical justice movements and note that they're all required collectives of people working towards a similar goal. And so whether it's on social media or at the dinner table or at a march or throwing an awareness event, there's so many people, there's so many things you can do to work with others, to inform others, and, you know, build up that collective action to make change.
We need it. So looking kind of more individually at the micro actions, what you can do on a general day-to-day basis. First is looking at sustainable fashion. So fashion is responsible for around 10% of global emissions, and the average t-shirt requires about 5,400 bottles of water to be made. Buy vintage, buy secondhand, make do with what you already have instead. Even we had talked about clothing swaps. Do clothing swaps with your pals.
You don't need to buy new. Everyone has a full closet that you can just switcheroo and new wardrobe.
A very full closet.
For free. Yeah. No consumption required.
Exactly. And you can have you make a whole thing of it. Have snacks.
Have a big party.
Yeah. Next is reduce food waste. So 2.3 million tons of food is wasted yearly in Canada. Instead of throwing away food, buy only what you need, prep your meals, use what you already have at home. Again, I've definitely tried to take this route. Previously, I was like, my life is too busy. I'm going to shop once during the week, and I would buy way too much. And then like the salad greens would go bad in like 2 days and would not eat them. So I try and make more frequent trips to the grocery store and only get what I need. It's hard though, especially with littles.
Well, there's finding the time, and also like groceries are so damn expensive.
Yeah, which I feel like is even more of a reason to like not have food waste. You're buying one apple for like $7. Don't do that. And last is just be more ethical in your consumption practices. So where you choose to spend your money definitely matters. Money talks.
Yes.
Ethical consumption means buying products that are ethically produced and are not harmful to the environment and society. You should be informed about the stuff that you purchase and you use. And I mean, I know there's like a bunch of Instagram accounts and TikToks and like websites and all that kind of stuff dedicated to ethically produced products. So you don't have much work to do.
So keep this in your brain. Keep this top of mind. We need to think about ourselves today and for the future. What kind of life we want our children and our children's children to live. What kind of world we want them to experience. So thank you so much for joining us today and learning alongside with us as we confronted the terrifying, really terrifying, but real life statistics impacting women and girls around the world. Please share this episode, rate and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and stay tuned for more ways to make a positive impact. Together, we can make the world less scary for women and girls.
Remember to follow us on Instagram at RaiseHerCo and at Scaries.podcast, and on TikTok at RaiseHerCo. Remember, change starts with awareness and action, which we are doing here today. Thank you for being a part of the Scaries community and making this world a little less scary to exist as a woman.
Bye.